Ding, there we go. All right. So no Dankers this week because they're in Sacramento. I think it's a kid's birthday or something. So I think they're planning to be back tomorrow. So yeah, prayers for them being in California and for safe travels out of California. Cass, did we scare Summer away? Okay. Yeah, probably not the best Bible study for your first. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Okay. Yeah. Maybe not Acts. I mean, Acts is useful, but it's. I mean, Acts is the growth of the church, so it's kind of dull if you're not already in the church. But I'd say the Gospels of Luke and John are good. Um, Mark might be easier than Luke. Mark is the shortest gospel and the action-oriented gospel. It just gets straight to the point. Um, so yeah, I would say start with either Mark or John. Mark, Luke, or John. Not that Matthew's bad, but Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience, and so he spends a lot of time going through how Christ is fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies. And if that interests people, so I'm not saying don't use Matthew, but Luke as an eyewitness, or Luke as a guy who interviewed eyewitnesses and put a report together um, as kind of a historical look at the whole thing, is useful for apologetics reasons. And then, or Mark as the shorter, more action-oriented gospel, and then John is the very spiritual gospel, gets a lot more into the theology, because when he's writing are probably the good gospels to start. And then Old Testament wise, I would say getting through Genesis and the first half of Exodus really sets up the whole Old Testament. So yeah, basically start with Genesis 1 until they start talking about the tabernacle for 15 chapters, and nobody wants to read that part anymore. Um, I would say that would be the entry point for the Old Testament. Um, but yeah, then if you don't want to go straight to the Bible, the Small Catechism obviously is the starting point um, in terms of systematic theology, and then the Augsburg Confession and its apology, which we'll be getting into eventually. Um, that's where we very formulaically sat down and said, this is what we believe. So she's just wondering about doctrine stuff in general that outlines everything. Um, yeah. All right. So I know we kind of ran out of time last week, so I don't want to cut off conversation. So if we want to talk more about husbands and wives and women and men and hear me rant about feminism some more, we can, or we can just move on. So um, any lingering questions from last week that we want to examine, or should we just jump in? I think at 3:8 is where we left off. Look, yep. Yes. So, yeah. Okay. So there's some regulations about divorce given in the Old Testament. I don't remember them completely off the top of my head, but it's the way I've heard it explained in studies I've listened to looking at it was divorce is bad, And the fact that there are regulations for how to do it in the Old Testament is not a condoning of it. It's more of a, well, if you're going to do it, because I can't stop you from being idiots, at least do it this way and try to minimize the damage. But it's not in it's not an endorsement of it, because when Jesus is asked about it, he says, Moses allowed you to give a certificate of divorce because of the hardness of your hearts. It's not like, oh, divorce was a good thing, so Moses decided to allow it. It was you guys are being idiots and you're going to do it anyway, so we're trying to minimize the damage. And so the Old Testament regulations about divorce are basically, if you divorce your wife, you have to actually be divorced. You can't do this thing where you like divorce your wife to go play the field a little bit, and then you realize that the dating pool is not as wonderful as you thought it would be. So now you want to go back to your wife and try to build your life again. It's like, no, you said you were done with her. You have to deal with your decisions now. And yeah, so well, reconciliation is good. It is the goal. It should be the goal. But it's, once you've gone out and played the field, now you have done sexual immorality, and so now it's more about not taking advantage of the woman and the male position in society, and just kind of abusing everything and trying to swing her life all around is the goal. But yeah, usually it's the woman who gets taken advantage of, especially in the Old Testament. The woman who's taking advantage, yeah, um, that's wrong too. So you get to the New Testament, they're asking Jesus about divorce, and he's pointing out these things. Like, you guys think that because there's laws about how to do a divorce that it's okay. It's not. That's just trying to minimize the damage as much as possible, but there's still damage, and we shouldn't be seeking damage anyway. And he quotes Genesis, when you can argue that marriage was first instituted. He created them male and female, so that the one man would leave his father and mother, and he would join to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. And as we saw last week in talking about Ephesians 5, as much as you can make the argument that marriage is a civil institution, Luther would marry people outside of the church, and then he'd celebrate the wedding inside the church, because he saw it as more of a function of the state, looking at Luther's idea of the two realms, and marriage is a law institution, therefore the state is the one to oversee it. And yeah, you can argue the state should be overseeing marriage, because again, the role of the state is the enforcement of the law. It's to make a just and peaceable society that its citizens can live in. And marriage and the family unit is the building block of society. So it really is in the government's interest to be promoting actual marriage, which our government has not been doing since Lyndon B. Johnson decided to incentivize single motherhood and try to get rid of family so that the state can become the father figure. And now that the state is actively working at destroying the institution of marriage and changing it from what marriage is, as we talked about last week, to marriage is now just, oh, I like hanging out with this person. They make me happy for 3 years, so I'll get married to them for a while until they don't make me happy anymore. That's the government abusing its power and not actually upholding marriage. Because remember, when Luther talks about the separation of church and state, he's not saying that they don't interact at all. They absolutely should interact. And so in Luther's worldview, the church should be standing here telling the state, hey, this is what marriage is supposed to be. This is what's really good for society. And then the state says, oh, I'm really interested in what's good for society, so I'll protect marriage as the church defines it. That would be the ideal society that we don't have. Sorry, I'm trying to find my way back. Getting there, yeah. So Jesus is asked about divorce, and he gives what we call the biblical escape clause, or whatever. I don't think that's the actual term. I don't know. So Jesus says that it's, except in the case of sexual immorality, you should not be getting divorced. And sexual immorality is, we're translating from Greek, and so there's a little bit of murkiness in exactly how you translate it. So some people say that divorce is only allowed if someone's actually cheating on a person. A lot of people put uh, abuse under that umbrella of immorality, because it's in an abuse situation you are also defiling the marriage bed, because you're, as we saw last week, for men especially, your role in marriage is to love your wife according to the biblical ideal of love, and that means not abusing them. That means looking out for her interests over your own. And so if the husband is being abusive towards his wife, or if the wife is being abusive to their husband, they're not upholding their part of the marriage. They're not doing the love that they are called to, that they have taken a vow to uphold. Um, and so a lot of people say that in the case of abuse, it's okay. Also, again, you have Abigail in, I think it's Second Solomon. Um, Abigail is she's a rebellious wife who gets praised for her rebellion, because her rebellion against the husband is for the safety of her household. And so I've heard that interpreted as, if it's a question of the safety of your household, that takes precedence over the submission to your husband thing. So the people who look at the verse that says, "Wives, submit to your husbands," and say, "Oh, you have to stay in in the marriage no matter what. You have to endure abuse because you have to submit to everything your husband says. He's basically a god to you." They're not reading that correctly either. So, excuse me, when there's abuse or whatever, and you have to get out for your own safety, for the safety of your kids, um, yeah, absolutely get out of there. Stay alive. Keep your kids alive. Um, mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because again, as a society, we've lost sight of what marriage actually is. Marriage is about personal satisfaction now. It's about what makes you happy. So I'm in this marriage to make myself happy, not to make my wife happy, to make myself happy. So if I'm not happy, I need to leave her and get a better wife. I need to take advantage of her to extract more happiness out of her. Um, when really, the marriage is supposed to be about self-sacrifice. Because again, it's this weird, somewhat mysterious. We don't fully understand it, but in some way, it's a microcosm of how God loves the church. God doesn't institute the church so that he can get lots of stuff from us, despite the Protestant view of worship, where church is there so that we can send praises up to God and tell him how wonderful he is. Um, God loves his church by dying for her and self-sacrificing for her and giving for her, and that's what marriage is supposed to look like, is that self-sacrificial giving of putting the other person's happiness over your own. And we've completely lost sight of that as a society. So now it is this: I'm not happy, I'm not getting enough out of this marriage. I've fallen out of love because I don't get the butterflies in my stomach anymore, and love is apparently just a feeling and not a verb that I wake up every morning and decide to do. So I'm going to leave until I find someone else who will give me happiness for the next 4 years until I'm no longer happy there, and then I'll move on to the next one. Mhm. Yeah, I don't get the post, but yeah. Mm. Yeah, the last statistic I heard was a 50% divorce rate, but I haven't been keeping up on that. Um, but yeah, and there are statistics. There's just a study released where it was examining how much the divorce rate drops if you don't cohabitate before marriage, if you actually do have a biblical understanding of what marriage is, and not, because again, the societal view is you play the field as long as you can, and then when you reach 34 and it's harder to pick up people at the bar, then you just kind of settle with the one that you're with, because that's going to be the best you can do from that point on. And then surprise, surprise, that marriage doesn't last. Um, but yeah, there was a study that just came out. It was like they were looking at people who got married like right out of college, 21, 22-ish, um, but because they didn't play the field beforehand, because they didn't cohabitate before marriage, because they actually recognized what marriage is, largely because most likely they were brought up in religious households that actually said this is what marriage is. The divorce rate plummets, or the percentage or the chances of divorce plummet drastically, because they're actually apparently raised being told what marriage is, and surprise, surprise, it works out. But yeah, I know the divorce rate isn't great, but when you break it down, um, religious people are less likely to get divorced. Religious people who actually go to church are less likely to get divorced. Like I said, religious people who didn't cohabitate before marriage, who didn't have premarital sex, the divorce rate drops down. And again, not to get into this purity culture mindset we got in the 90s where they said, oh, if you do A, B, and C, then your marriage is guaranteed to be successful. But it's much more likely to be successful if you do A, B, and C. Sorry, I have a lot of branches going on in my head right now. Trying to get back to your earlier questions. All right, so looking at divorce itself. So again, it's never good. There's always sin involved some way. I mean, even if you have the biblically authorized divorce, that means that somebody cheated on somebody, so a sin has definitely occurred. And so this idea of an amicable divorce or a completely neutral divorce is not a thing. Sin is always, I mean, even if it is this husband and wife wake up one morning and they both look at each other and say, I'm not happy anymore, let's get divorced, we sign our papers, we're not going to fight about it in court. Even if it's the theoretical, completely amicable divorce, there's still a sin happening because divorce is a sin. What God has joined together, let man not separate. You took vows before God and man, assuming you had a church wedding, you took vows before God and man that you're going to love this person until death do you part. And in doing this, you're going to have some kind of mirroring of how Christ loves his church. As a witness to the world, this is what God's love to us somewhat looks like. And now you're just splitting up. Where in the Bible does God say, all right, church or Israel or whatever, I'm done with you. I'm going to go marry the Canaanites now. It doesn't happen. Again, look, Hosea is our example of a godly husband, because that's how the book starts out. God's like, hey, Hosea, you're going to model my relationship to Israel. So you're going to marry a prostitute, and she's going to keep running out on you, and you're going to keep pursuing her and trying to bring her back into the fold, because that's what God does for the Israel for the entirety of the Old Testament. Israel keeps whoring itself after other gods. That's the language used whenever they go after other gods, because there is this weird kind of marital relationship between God and his church. Not that you're married to God as an individual, but as the church you are, because the church is the bride of Christ. Israel keeps going off after other gods, whoring itself after other gods, and God disciplines them and he shows them the error of their ways through various means. But at the end of the day, he still takes them back, and he's always seeking reconciliation. And so, in a situation of divorce, really reconciliation should be the goal. And that's, Jesus has that stuff in Matthew 5 that always makes it really awkward to talk about if a man divorces his wife and then he marries another woman, he's made an adulterer. Because divorce is a civil thing, but you've made a vow before God that you're supposed to be joined together. So in issues of divorce, really, reconciliation should be a goal. Even if you sign the documents and legally you're divorced, if the relationship can be resolved, you should seek to resolve it and get remarried, so that you're not in this brokenness of what God has joined together, which becomes increasingly awkward as we're in a very divorce-heavy culture, and you have people who get married again, and then it's like, well, you don't divorce your second wife to go back to your first wife. That's kind of what was going on in the Old Testament when Moses gives the law about divorce. But you don't fix this by now breaking this. You've made the vows. You're over here now, and it just gets messy and gross and awkward. And this is divorce really should be discouraged, and it should not be as quick of a resort as it often is in society, because there's always this messiness involved. It always involves sin in some way. So for the sake of people who have been divorced and possibly are remarried, I will say, divorce is not the unforgivable sin. Just like all other sins, there is forgiveness available. But I think to even get to that point, you need to first admit that there was sin involved in some way, and you were probably part of it. Um, again, I'm not like a woman gets abused by her husband and she leaves him. I'm not saying it's her fault that he abused her. But knowing human nature is that we all sin. I'm sure she sinned in some way within the marriage, and so I would say repent of that, seek forgiveness, and then go from there. Um, but again, just like any other discussion of sin, the fact that forgiveness is available is not a license to sin. It's not an excuse to say, oh, well, I'm going to be forgiven for divorce. I'm just going to divorce my husband anyway, and I'll go to the confessional and everything will be fine. We And this is the weird line I have to walk down anytime we're talking about divorce, because I don't want to condemn anyone who's been divorced and say you're stuck in your sin forever, you're going to hell now. But at the same, so I need to offer grace and forgiveness for it, because grace and forgiveness is available. But at the same time, I don't want to become a gospel reductionist and say, oh, it's fine that you were divorced. God forgave you. There's no worries there. There's no sin involved, because there is sin involved, and you need to. I think people need to be aware of and repentant of that, and then do better going forward, for lack of a better phrase. So I don't know. Have I answered the questions that are floating out there, or do I need to get back? I have no idea where I am anymore.
My problem with the situation is this, and I think it's because society moved away from church.
Yeah. Yeah.
People get married for their own reasons.
Mm-hmm.
All together.
Yeah.
They get divorced, which is a result of whatever is done or wrong is given.
Mm-hmm.
Wrong.
Yeah.
They get divorced, and then it becomes a competition who gets in a relationship for the other, because that the one that stays in that relationship. And you can't explain to people, like they look at a person who's like, okay, I've tried it, it didn't work, or I'm not doing it again. At least I have to work on myself for a while. And you get those pointing fingers like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to be in a relationship? Maybe it's not for me. Maybe it's
Yeah.
maybe there's aspects of my life I want to improve or work on for a while, or I have more important things. Because marriage is not for everyone.
Yeah.
Not everybody was meant to get married.
Right. Yeah. Paul says singleness is a gift. Yeah, that's a sin. Yeah. Yeah. And this is. I'll fix it before the service. I'll just grab the handheld for now. I can grab some batteries. I can do the handheld for the Bible study. Check 1, 2, if it's on. Okay, that's on. Well, no, this is on, but it's on. The board is not on, I assume.
I'm sorry, it's a sticky subject.
Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, I was on there. All right, I will pull the batteries out of this. And I will put them in the wireless. All right, check. Okay, there we go. All right. So Loy's question first. I'll get to yours, Cass, hopefully. Um, I did not prepare to talk about divorce today, so I'm very much on the spot. So sorry if I say the wrong thing. But yeah, this is again, society has completely lost sight of what marriage is and what marriage is for, and so then the marriage falls apart because people didn't really understand what it was going into it, and then they don't learn their lesson, and so as they go through the fallout of that, they continue to not learn their lesson, and everything just gets messier and more complicated. And that, yeah, I think that's what you're describing. Um, and I think we have this in society. We have this weird fetishization of marriage, even as we as a society continue to not understand what it really is. And so it's like, yeah, everyone desires marriage because they see it as kind of a status symbol now, or because they grew up hearing you're supposed to get married, and so it's just kind of the thing you're supposed to do. But nobody ever, again, people don't actually understand what it is, and so they get married just because it's the thing you're supposed to do, and then it falls apart because no one ever actually taught them what marriage is supposed to look like, or at least one person didn't know what marriage was supposed to look like, and it all falls apart. But then they're still stuck with this mindset, marriage is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to find someone else and get married and hope that it works this time. But they never really learn what marriage is, and so they just keep going into it blindly, hoping that it works out this time. And maybe it does. I hope it does. But again, if you have no idea what you're actually getting into or what it's supposed to look like, you shouldn't be surprised that it falls apart. Um, it's if I keep totaling my cars because I'm trying to fix the engines myself without ever going to mechanic school and learning how to fix an engine, I shouldn't be surprised that the engine keeps exploding on me. Um, and my response should not just be, okay, well, I'll tinker with this engine and maybe it'll work this time. My response would be, if I'm going to be doing this thing, maybe I should go to mechanic school and figure out what I'm doing before I go into it. And then I'll have a much higher success rate, I would assume. Um, and so we still have this, although it's starting to go away now in the rise of cohabitation and of a generation or two of everyone growing up with broken families and not trusting marriage anyway. So now you have people who don't get married in the first place. Um, and I've seen studies where people are treating marriage itself as like this status symbol. So it's not, marriage is disconnected from the relationship. You just want to have the relationship, and then if your life is together and you're financially well off, then you get married on top of that as a way to proclaim to the world, oh, look at me, I can throw a bunch of money at a wedding. um, which, throwing a whole bunch of money at a wedding is a whole thing too. Statistically, again, I know correlation doesn't cause causation or doesn't imply causation, but there's a correlation between really expensive weddings and that marriage not lasting very long. Probably because the worst way to start a marriage is in massive debt. Um, so that's a whole thing. Um, mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And the analysis I've seen on that is you're probably starting off the marriage in massive debt because of that huge wedding, and B, usually when you have a really massive and expensive wedding, it's because the girl grew up dreaming about her dream wedding. This was her special day, not our special day, her special day. This is her chance to show the world how wonderful and beautiful she can be. Everything's about her, and if your marriage is starting off with everything being about her, that's not a good recipe for success either. Um, but yeah, so we still have this kind of socially ingrained desire for marriage, and I would say it goes deeper than socially ingrained. I think that there is a natural inclination towards marriage because, again, the law of God is written on our hearts. Even if people don't believe in God, they still have a conscience. They still have this idea of the law of certain things being right or wrong, as much as the atheists want to deny it. And because marriage is the right way to have relations between the sexes, I think there is a natural desire for marriage even when you don't really understand what it is. And so there is this draw to get married. But again, if you don't understand what it is going in, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Um, and then it falls apart and people don't learn from it. And they don't say, hey, maybe I should actually look into what marriage is. They just jump into the next relationship and the next marriage because we're built for companionship. It's not good for man to be alone. I know that's not necessarily the case for everybody. Again, Paul does say it's probably better to be single if you can be, but a lot of people just they can't be single. That we need a lot of people. We need companionship. We need something to go home to other than our cat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's what we're looking at. We're a yeah, we're like two or three generations of people growing up with divorced parents. Is I know my experience is going to be a little bit different because I went to a private religious school. But when I was in like second and third grade, I think there was only one kid in my class who had divorced parents. By the time I got to high school, it was like half of the kids in my class had divorced parents, and I'm sure it's only gotten worse because again, 50 to 70% divorce rate, whatever it is, and so a lot of society we've grown up with divorced parents and broken households, and people don't have that model of what it should look like. Um, so this is part of being a parent and raising your child is showing them how you live in a marriage, so that then when they grow up and are starting to look for a marriage, they actually have an idea of what it's supposed to look like because they saw it modeled the entire time they were growing up. But if you grew up with three dads and four Christmases every year, and you're going to a different household every 2 weeks. The mantra, as no fault divorce started to be a thing, was just the kids will be all right, and all of the sociological data said no, the kids are not all right. But we don't want to hear that because we want marriage to be our own selfish thing. We don't want to actually acknowledge the damage it does to anyone. So people just plug their ears and say, no, the kids will be all right. I can do what I want as long as I'm happy. Because the most important thing is that the parent themselves be happy so that they can be a good parent to their kid. Because God forbid you ever sacrifice anything for your kid. Um, mm-hmm. Yeah, 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 yeah. That they don't have a home. They have four temporary homes that they get passed along to. It's not good for them. But then again, they don't grow up seeing what an actual lifelong marriage is supposed to look like. So they have no frame of reference for it when it comes time for them to be looking at potential spouses. Um, mhm. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Oof. Yeah. That's an issue too. Yeah. But then there's so again going to our discussion last week. Men and women are different, and again, this is the number one predictor for success in life is that you have both parents in the household raising you, and I think part of that is seeing dad and mom are different. They relate to things in different ways. How do they work out these differences between themselves? And so marriage is not just about showing your kids what a healthy marriage, or parenthood is not just about showing your kids what a healthy marriage is, but it's also showing your kids how men and women relate to each other, and also recognizing the ways that men and women are different. And now we're 40 years into every single motherhood being the norm and everyone being divorced and kids only grow up with one parent in the household. No wonder they have no idea that men and women are different anymore because they don't see them interact on a personal level. All the interaction they see, you know, if again, single motherhood tends to be the norm. I'm not saying that single fatherhood isn't a thing, but it tends to be a single mother in a broken home situation. Most school teachers are women statistically. So you have a whole bunch of people growing up where the only authority figure they see is an adult female. They don't really interact with adult males too much. And so they get out into the real world, and everyone says, "Oh, you can be a strong, independent woman who don't need no man. Women can do everything men can. They're completely equal. There is no difference at all. They're completely interchangeable." And the kid says, "Well, yeah, I've only ever seen female authority figures my whole life, so yeah, I guess there isn't any kind of leadership that men would be better at than women. Men are completely interchangeable. Maybe I'm a man. I have no idea." Everything's falling apart. Yeah. Yeah. What are we gonna do about it? I don't know. But, yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So this is, again, this is the situation that Peter is writing to in First Peter. He's writing to people who converted to Christianity in a largely non-Christian region. And how do you deal with the fact that you now know the truth and no one else around you does? And his overarching advice is, be unapologetically Christian. You're going to look different than your neighbors, and that's fine. You should look different than your neighbors. Live out that difference. Let them see that difference. Be a witness to how human life is supposed to function according to the law given to us by the guy who designed it all. And be a faithful witness in your life. And then when society says, "No, we don't like that, we're going to kill you," and then you just say, "All right." And then you die, and you let your death be a witness that you're willing to die on this hill, that this is what life is supposed to look like. And eventually maybe people will see, like, be like, why do we keep killing these guys who just tell us to be nice to each other? Are we the bad guys? um, that's the hope. um, I mean, the trajectory you're on, we're probably just, America's going to collapse like the Roman Empire did, and then we'll see a nice Christian empire rise in Ethiopia or something. But yeah, our calling is to just live as Christian. Whatever your vocation is, do it faithfully as a Christian. Let your life be different. And when people ask you why it's different, be ready to give them the answer. Because I understand how life, or I more or less understand how life is supposed to work. Maybe not all the finer points, but I have the broad picture of what life is supposed to work, how human life is supposed to function. I have the laws of the universe given to me by the guy who designed it all. I'm going to follow those. And maybe society would be a lot better if we all did that instead of just running off and being insane. Um, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 We can move forward. We can't, again, we can find forgiveness. You can make peace with things. And that the peace of forgiveness is something that the world is severely lacking. That I'm just on all sorts of soapboxes today. But, this is the thing with the cancel culture going on, is there isn't forgiveness. If you made a bad tweet 30 years ago, you're not allowed to participate in society anymore. Even when you apologize, you didn't apologize hard enough, and so you're still canceled. I just don't know. So, yeah. Yeah, no, there's a girl 2 years ago. She was accepted into whatever her dream college was, but then the high school girl that didn't like her had saved a video of her saying the N word because she was rapping along with music when she was a freshman. So 3 years ago, she said a word that another black man said in a rap song, and then they uploaded the video, and her college acceptance was pulled because how dare you do this thing 3 years ago? There's nothing you can ever do to make amends for it. You're just a racist now. And then, if she turns out to be a racist, well, big surprise. Yeah. there's no forgiveness in the world. The world functions under law. You need the church for grace, and when people don't have church, they have no acknowledgement of grace. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. I've never actually seen blackface. All my everything I've heard about it has been the filter down. It was done to be derogatory or to make a mockery of them. So I don't know. I haven't seen it myself. I can't say either way. But yeah. So I just saw an article. I think it was 2 days ago. So on the Disney Plus streaming service, they now have I think it's a 14 and plus parental control thing that you can put on yourself or on your accounts. Um, to make sure that kids don't inadvertently watch Dumbo without a parent there to like explain the Jim Crows in Dumbo and how we don't believe that anymore. And it's like it's Dumbo. Kids don't even know that the crows are supposed to be black people until you tell them that. But yeah, I mean, at least they're not pulling it completely out of their catalog, but they're putting all these warnings and disclaimers on. I saw the top 10 list, and it's like Dumbo and Beauty and the Beast and Peter Pan and I forget the other ones on the list, but there's like disclaimers now before those movies that come up as like this movie portrays racist caricatures. It was wrong then and it's wrong now, but we want to make sure that it's still here so we can raise discussions about how we can be better. And it's like, yeah, it's okay. The way the Native Americans are portrayed in Peter Pan is probably racist, but nobody nobody thinks. Yeah, I mean they're fantastical representations. I watched Peter Pan when I was a kid. When I actually met a Native American, I wasn't like, oh, you're like the Peter Pan people. I could recognize that fantasy is different than reality, although maybe I'm special nowadays. So, all right, this may not apply to anybody. Yeah. So I'm a big nerd. I play Dungeons and Dragons. It's not satanic. I can go on that whole tangent if we need to. So this is the big thing that's popping up in the world of Dungeons and Dragons over the last 5 years or so. So in Dungeons and Dragons, you have orcs. You also have them in Lord of the Rings because Dungeons and Dragons basically ripped off Lord of the Rings when it was made. Somebody So somebody looked at descriptions of orcs in Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons, and they're like, "Oh, here's this evil, violent race that wants to kill everything. Obviously, this is supposed to represent black people. So anyone who plays Dungeons and Dragons is now a racist because you think that orcs are these big evil thugs that are representative of black people." And so this is the whole push in Dungeons and Dragons now is you're not allowed to have races that are always evil anymore because someone has decided that all of the fantasy races are supposed to represent ethnic groups. And I'm just sitting here and it's like, I never thought orcs are supposed to represent black people. The fact that you say, oh, here's a violent race of thugs that want to kill everything, and you decided that means black people, I think that makes you the racist. But again, the world is insane. We're way over here. So getting back to the issues of divorce and the way society is a mess now because of it. This is it's not the only reason, but this is one of the primary reasons that the church is trying to finally stand up to all of the nonsense about how marriage is getting redefined. This is, just as when no fault divorce came about and the mantra was just the kids are fine or the kids will be all right or whatever. That's what we're seeing with the whole issue of gay marriage now. It's like, because again, men and women are interchangeable. We don't need a mother and a father figure anymore. Pete Buttigieg and his pretend husband got wide acclaim for showing a picture of the two of them sitting in a hospital bed with the twins that they bought through a surrogate. And we're just sitting here like, where's the mother? Why are you even in a hospital bed? Why are you celebrating the fact that you've ripped this child away from their mother, not letting them know who their actual biological parents are, and we're celebrating this because You think that you can be a father and mother together, even though you're both trying to be fathers. But oh no, men and women are interchangeable. There's no difference at all. They're the way they approach life will be exactly the same that a woman would be. Um, Again, if marriage is supposed to be, part of marriage is seeing how women and men interact and seeing what their differences are and how they work around and resolve those differences. And now you're throwing a child into a household where there's two men or two women and they don't see that interaction anymore. How is that going to be equivalent? How is that going to help them grow up to be in a world where there are women and men and they have to understand that you relate to them differently and they're going to react to things differently? They're missing out on that. Just everything's falling apart. And like my sermon from last week or 2 weeks ago, this is the church being Cassandra from Greek mythology saying, "You're doing it wrong. Everything's going to go terrible." And they just say, "Ha ha, you're ridiculous. Oh, look, a nice horse," and then everything falls apart. And we'll just be sitting here being like, "Told you so." And they're just over here like, no one warned us about this." And we're just like, ah. So yeah, this is what's going through my head all the time. That's why I'm always so frustrated. All right, trying to finally get back to your question. So this is the marriage is just a piece of paper argument thing. Yeah, that's bunk. So again, with this, I know correlation doesn't mean causation, but if you look at the statistics, the chances of divorce like double whenever you have premarital cohabitation being a thing. And the explanations I've seen for this are either A, you have a couple who really they're not compatible, they shouldn't get married, but because they've entered into this cohabitation contract, it ends up being the same as like, all right, well, we either need to get married or we need to break up and figure out how to separate all of our stuff and basically go through a divorce without actually going through a divorce. That sounds like a lot of work, so we may as well just get married, and then surprise, surprise, it doesn't work out and they end up getting divorced and having to go through the whole thing anyway. Or B, it's just because they've built their relationship on this concept of not having commitment. Because that's what marriage is a commitment. And so when you're doing premarital cohabitation, what you're saying is, I don't really want to commit to you. I want the benefits of marriage without the commitment. I want to have this relationship knowing that if ever you don't make me happy, I can just leave and we won't have to get the courts involved. Won't that be nice and convenient? And so you end up in this relationship where you can never really have a relationship because the whole time you're thinking, if this gets bad, I can leave. Or if I'm not being good enough for this person, they're going to leave. And so you can't have full openness and trust anymore. Whereas, if you're in a marriage and you actually know how marriage is supposed to work and you're both committed to not getting divorced and you have a problem, you have to actually sort it out and deal with it because the problem's not going to go away and neither of you are going to go away. So something has to get fixed. And so you have to face the issue and deal with it. And usually the relationships get stronger because of that. So the counter argument I've heard, and again, it's an analogy, so it's not perfect, but yeah, sure, marriage is just a piece of paper, but so is $100 bill, and I don't see you throwing stacks of hundreds in the fire for no reason. Yeah, your marriage license is a piece of paper, but it represents something more, something worth fighting for, something that should be cherished and taken care of. So marriage is not just a piece of paper. The piece of paper is just there to represent that the marriage actually occurred. But there's something transcendent about it that you're actually supposed to fight for and guard and protect. So there's a show in the '90s called Dharma and Greg. For those of you who don't know, Dharma was the daughter of hippie parents, and Greg is this uptight lawyer from a New England WASP family. And I think the pilot episode, they get drunk and married together in Vegas, and so the whole show is the hilarity ensues between the hippie child and the staunch lawyer and how they approach the world in vastly different ways, and yada yada yada. So there's an episode where Dharma's parents decide that they're actually going to get married because again they're hippies, they're flower children, they've just been doing the cohabitation thing for the last 50 years or whatever, never actually got married, and for one reason or another they decide they're going to get married. And of course everything starts to fall apart because they're hippies. So as soon as they're going to put a name and define their relationship, it won't work anymore. And so now they're like thinking about maybe breaking up because this idea of marriage is throwing everything asunder, and they're trying to talk to Dharma about it. And like this is, I don't know, there might have been other good points in the show, but this is the only one I remember because it's a really good point. So Dharma is confronting her mom about their non-married relationship that she grew up in. And she's like, so when I was growing up, you always told me that it was better that you weren't married because that meant that every day you woke up and that you chose to be together and you weren't tied together by some piece of paper. But did you ever think about how I felt waking up every morning thinking, is this going to be the day that mom and dad don't choose to be with each other? When you don't have that commitment, you don't have that foundation, you don't have that security within the relationship, and so you can never be completely open with that person. And then that gets reflected to the kids, and it's just, again, everything crumbles apart because we're in this very individualistic American mindset. All the libertarians are like, no, the prime minority is the individual. Everything's about the individual and how you can work with others to try to get the most out of your relationship as individuals. But the building block of society is not the individual, it's the family. And when we completely destroy the family, when we break everything down to the individual, of course everything falls apart. Because when everything is about the individual, it's about selfishness. It's about what can I as an individual get out of this. But the whole point of marriage and family is learning how to be self-sacrificial and giving things up for the sake of somebody else. If I was alone, I would probably be eating loaves of garlic bread every night because I love garlic bread. I have a wife who can't have garlic bread right now because she can't have dairy because of the baby. So it can't really do garlic bread. We can kind of make it work with a fake butter, but it's not quite the same, and there's no Parmesan. But even when we make garlic bread, I have to share it because I want to make my wife happy. I want to give her the garlic bread. Ultimately, it makes me a better person because I'm only eating half a loaf of garlic bread now. But I'm growing as a person. I'm learning how to be more generous. I'm learning it's not just about me and my love of garlic bread, but it's about making my wife happy by giving her garlic bread. This is a really weird analogy. I'm sorry. But the family unit, it teaches you how to be self-sacrificial for the sake of others. And then that grows to how you interact with the community. And it also helps shape your own selfishness. So if I'm living by myself, I don't care too much about the schools in my area because I'm not going to school there. Why does it matter to me? Now I have a daughter who, we're hoping to homeschool her, not send her to the schools, but I hope she makes friends with other kids in the area. And so I kind of care that those kids are not complete idiots. So maybe I do care about the schools in my area now because, if Magdalena gets a job and we have to send Lydia to a school instead of homeschool, I want it to be a good school for her. Even if she's still homeschooled, I want her friends to not be idiots. I want them to have good schooling. So now suddenly I care about the schools in my area. I care about safety zones and making the neighborhood safe for my wife and family. Maybe this is just me, but if I were just single, I don't really care too much if I get shot because I have issues with depression anyway. I have a wife and kid to care about now, so I care a lot more about safety than I did when I was single. I want to have a nice neighborhood. I care about having a well-funded police force, not just for the sake of not having my stuff stolen, but for the sake of keeping my family safe. And so even if you can argue it's kind of selfish for me that I want to have a nice neighborhood now for the sake of my family. The fact that I have a family is shaping my selfishness, and now that I'm actually more concerned about the community around me, and I'm going to be more committed to caring for the community around me. And so now that I have a family as my building block for society instead of just myself, I suddenly care a lot more about society than I did when I was single. But with the destruction of the family, we lose that. With this obsession with American individualism and everything's just about me, you lose that. With this whole Marxist idea of destroying the family and making everyone dependent on the state, you lose all of that. Because when you're dependent on the state, everything's just about, well, whatever the state wants and makes it happy, I guess that's what I have to do because that's my family. It's not about the people around you anymore. It's just, yeah, everything's a mess. Everything's stupid. We're in a clown world. Sorry, I don't mean to be cynic, but here we are. Did I answer questions, or are there still questions I completely missed? I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I speak too far in broad generalizations, but
Another thing, and this really bothers me when I get that they consider a teenager in high school is not normal unless they start dating,
mm-hmm.
which is I don't understand. Teenager in high school is in no position to start a family or do anything
Yeah.
of that concept.
Yeah,
And
and
all that's going to come out of it is trouble, and maybe because it pushes on it hard.
yeah, and this is part of that. It's the societal draw to marriage without understanding what marriage is. And so part of it is just, oh, you have to get married, so you have to start dating now and figuring out what that looks like. Um, but because we don't really understand what marriage is, we don't really understand what dating is either. Because dating is supposed to be about finding a spouse. But since finding a spouse is now a luxury thing, and really you just want to have a cohabitating relationship until they don't make you happy anymore. Um, again, this is trying to get the benefits of marriage without any of the drawbacks. Um, and so now that we've completely lost sight of marriage, we've lost sight of what dating is. Because yeah, dating is supposed to be about finding, or is supposed to lead up to marriage, about finding the person you want to marry that you actually can love for the rest of your life. And so dating becomes about trying to get the benefits of marriage without any of the drawbacks. Um, and so now, yeah, and this is part of the destruction of the family. But now you have this great societal push where we need to be having sex education for all the kids and teaching them how to do it. You go to Florida that says, hey, maybe we shouldn't be teaching kindergartners about how to have sex, and everyone freaks out. It's like, no, we have to be able to teach 5-year-olds about how to have sex. We have to have drag queens in the classroom letting them know that they should just do whatever makes them feel good and whatever makes them happy, and there is no moral law. Do as you will and be unto yourself as like a god. That's not Satanism at all. Um, that's where we are in society, because we don't know what marriage is anymore. So we don't know how to work towards marriage anymore. And so everything just becomes about the individual and the individual's pleasure and what makes you happy. And so then that gets passed on to kids. Just do whatever, follow your heart, do what makes you happy. If it feels good, then it's right. Live your truth. Um, because if we tell kids that's not how it works, then we have to live by that. And adults don't want to live by that, and so they just have to pass the buck on to the kids and destroy their kids' lives so that they can destroy their lives relatively guilt free. And everything's just a mess. Um, Yeah, yeah. Gen Z is like the first in the last 4 generations to be getting more conservative than their parents. It's not as much as a swing towards conservatism as I like to see, but it is nice to see that the swing is happening. And I think it is because they're seeing the fruits of liberalism. Try not to get too political, but they're seeing all of the broken families and the broken households and the way that nobody's happy anymore and everyone's just being selfish and not really showing self-sacrificial love anymore. And they're just like, you keep telling me that this is what I'm supposed to want, but you don't even want it. Why should I want it? Maybe I should listen to these people over here that like they do seem to have a lower divorce rate. They do generally seem to be happier. They aren't always going on Facebook yelling at everybody about how happy they are. How dare you question their life choices? I'm so happy. Can't you see how happy I am? Maybe I don't want that. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe Gen Z will turn everything around, or yeah, we'll see. It's all on you, Caesar. No pressure. Sorry, I don't mean to get all doom and gloomy. I spend too much time on Twitter. Yeah, Twitter's terrible. Twitter banned the Babylon Bees account because they said that men are men. And they won't restore the account until Babylon Bee itself deletes the tweet. Twitter could delete it, but they don't want to do that. They want to force Babylon Bee to bend the knee. So that's the whole thing going on Twitter right now. Putin still has a Twitter account, but Trump doesn't. That makes sense. Uh, yeah. It's like we can't play Tchaikovsky in the orchestra anymore because he was a Russian from 300 years ago. But we can let Putin still have a Twitter account. Yeah, it's yeah, clown world. This is why I say everything's stupid. Not that I think every individual person is stupid, but society is stupid. Yeah. All right, so that's about time. Yes. Yeah. You can make the you can make the argument of ignorance to a point. So I'm being semantic here, but ignorance just means you don't know any better and you don't necessarily have the opportunity to know better. But the opportunity to know better is there because the church has been screaming it for the last 2,000 years. This is a better way to do it. And people plug their ears and ignore it. So I think by the time you get to being willfully ignorant, then I would say it's getting into stupid territory. But you can make the argument for ignorance as well, I guess. It's probably the nicer way to say it.
You can reason with a person, you can reason with the people.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot reason with the society.
Yeah.
When you bundle them in one room,
Mm-hmm.
they all move right away in a certain direction. They force
Yeah, it's like in Men in Black when Jay is being brought into the agency. He turns to Kay and he's like, "Why don't you just tell everyone about the aliens on all of this? People are smart; they'll get it." And Kay's response is like, "No, a person is smart. People are dumb, ignorant, and go into a mob mentality." Uh,
yeah, that mob mentality
yeah,
is you want to flip a country within
yeah,
5 days. Just start a certain, start a certain rumor,
mm-hmm.
and it will create that start that way, and it won't
Yeah,
stop. There's no point to stop.
yeah. All right, so we're at time now. So yeah, sorry if I got too cynical or doom and gloomy, and I don't know, this might get us struck on YouTube because I said things about the alphabety that YouTube doesn't like, but here we are. All right, so yeah. So I will all pray us out, and maybe we'll get to the actual Bible next week. All right, good discussion. I enjoy it. Thanks for letting me rant. Because Magdalena's sick of me hearing me rant, so I don't get to do it at home. Yeah. All right, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gifts of our families in one way or another. We thank you for the vocations you've put us in where we might show self sacrificial love and hopefully experience self sacrificial love on our behalf as well within those, that they might be models of the way that you love us, that we might better understand the depth of your affection for us even when we go astray. We thank you for the community that we have here, that we can have these discussions and try to figure out practical applications for the theology that we have. And we ask that you would continue to grant us wisdom, grant us learning, and help us to know these truths deep in our heart and live them out as witnesses to those around us, that we might show that there is a better way and that we know that way because it is your way that has been revealed to us. So please bless us as we are about to enter into the worship service to receive your gifts of word and sacrament, and help keep us safely in your hands until we can once again gather in your name, in which we pray. Amen.